Every maritime tracking network, every news organization, and every Iranian official who monitors American military communications understood exactly what had just appeared in the waters within striking distance of their country. An Ohio-class ballistic missile submarine, the backbone of America's naval nuclear deterrent. A vessel that carries up to 24 Trident II D5 submarine-launched ballistic missiles, each capable of delivering multiple independently targetable nuclear warheads with intercontinental range. A platform so lethal that the United States Navy has spent decades developing the acoustic signature management, the operational security procedures, the deterrence doctrine, and the communications architecture to keep these boats invisible. Because their invisibility is their deterrence value. You cannot target what you cannot find. You cannot preempt a second strike capability whose location you do not know. The United States Navy surfaced this submarine in Gibraltar and told the world it was there. That is not normal. That is a message. And it is the most consequential single signal delivered in this conflict since Operation Epic Fury's opening strikes on February 28th. Stay with me. Because the Ohio-class submarine's deliberate surfacing in Gibraltar is not the only nuclear-adjacent asset that moved on May 10th and 11th. Simultaneously, a U.S. Navy E-6B Mercury aircraft, the specific platform whose operational mandate is maintaining communications with the American submarine fleet and whose wartime function includes the transmission of launch orders to ballistic missile submarines, arrived in Germany. 2 assets. One that launches, one that orders the launch. Both made visible, both made public, both positioned within the specific operational context of a president who met with his entire national security team on May 11th to discuss how to move forward with Iran, and left that meeting leaning toward taking some form of military action. The ceasefire is on life support. Trump's words, delivered with the specific medical analogy that he chose deliberately, the doctor walks in and says, "Your loved one has approximately a 1% chance of living." 1%. The President of the United States is characterizing the diplomatic framework that has been nominally containing this conflict since April 8th as having a 1% survival probability. This is not the communication of a principal who is working to preserve the diplomatic channel. It is the communication of a principal who is preparing the public, the allies, the adversary, and his own institutional apparatus for the moment when that 1% becomes 0. Begin with the submarine. Because the strategic logic of the Ohio-class surfacing in Gibraltar requires specific analytical attention before anything else in this picture can be properly understood. The United States maintains the most capable submarine fleet in the world. A combination of fast attack submarines, guided missile submarines, and the Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines that form the sea-based leg of the nuclear triad. The ballistic missile submarine's deterrence value comes specifically from its undetectability. An adversary that does not know where an Ohio-class submarine is cannot target it in a first strike. An adversary that cannot target the submarine in a first strike cannot eliminate the second strike capability that submarine represents. The invulnerability of the submarine leg of the nuclear triad is what makes the triad's deterrence credible, because even an adversary that believed it could eliminate American land-based ICBMs and bomber-delivered nuclear weapons in a first strike would still face the retaliatory capability of a submarine fleet that cannot be located, targeted, or preempted. The deliberate surfacing of an Ohio-class submarine in Gibraltar is the specific inversion of this deterrence logic for messaging purposes. Normally, these submarines are invisible to demonstrate invulnerability. When the Navy surfaces one in port and releases the photographs in the official statement, it is demonstrating presence rather than hiding capability. It is saying, we are here, we are close, we are visible, and the weapon we carry is the most devastating on Earth. This message is directed at multiple audiences simultaneously. For the Iranian regime, the escalation ladder that the conflict has been climbing has not reached its top. The American military options that have been deployed to this point, carrier-based aviation, surface combatants, precision-guided munitions, blockade enforcement, represent the conventional dimension of American military power. The Ohio-class submarine's appearance in Gibraltar is the signal that the nuclear dimension of American power is within range and has been deliberately positioned to be within range. This does not mean nuclear use is imminent or planned. It means the Iranian regime is being reminded in the most visible possible way that its confrontation is not with American conventional military capability alone. For Russia and China, the submarine's arrival in Gibraltar coincides with Trump's approaching state visit to Beijing on May 13th through 15th. The American president arriving in China for a 2-day summit on the Iran nuclear question, on trade, on Taiwan, the full spectrum of American-Chinese strategic competition, arrives with the visible reminder that American nuclear power has been deliberately surfaced in the Atlantic approaches to the Mediterranean in the days before his arrival. This is Trump's negotiating posture made physical. We are serious. We have resources that no other country can match. The submarine is the embodiment of that message in a form that requires no interpretation. For the American domestic audience, the submarine surfacing is the institutional communication that the administration's military posture has escalated, that the ceasefire on life support is not producing the concessions the American side required, and that the assets being positioned in response are not the same category as the carrier strike groups and precision-guided munitions that have been the conflict's primary instruments to this point. For NATO allies, the Navy's statement specifically notes that the port visit demonstrates U.S. capability, flexibility, and continuing commitment to its NATO allies. Gibraltar is NATO territory. The submarine's arrival is the demonstration that American extended nuclear deterrence is active, visible, and not constrained by the operational tempo in the Persian Gulf. The E-6B Mercury aircraft is the second element of this nuclear signaling architecture that has not received the attention its operational significance demands. The E-6B is the Navy's airborne command and control platform for ballistic missile submarines, the specific aircraft whose mission is maintaining communications with the submarine force and transmitting emergency action messages that include nuclear launch orders. In the normal peacetime environment, these aircraft operate on continuous airborne alert, maintaining the communications link between the National Command Authority and the submarine fleet that makes the submarine leg of the nuclear triad responsive to presidential direction. Their arrival in Germany, announced on May 11th simultaneously with the Ohio-class submarine's public surfacing, completes the specific operational pairing. The platform that launches and the platform that orders the launch, both made public, both positioned, both visible. This is not an accident of scheduling. The Navy does not accidentally release simultaneous announcements about a ballistic missile submarine's port visit and an E-6B Mercury's deployment to Germany. These announcements were coordinated. The timing, coinciding with Trump's national security team meeting on May 11th, with the ceasefire declared on life support, with the Axios report that Trump is leaning toward military action, is the operational communication architecture working as designed. Show the capability. Show the command and control. Let the adversary understand the full scope of what has been positioned. Now let us examine the national security team meeting of May 11th, because the Axios reporting on it is the most operationally specific public disclosure of American decision-making at the principal level that has appeared in the conflict's current phase. Trump met with Vice President Vance, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, Secretary of State Rubio, Secretary of Defense Hegseth, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, and National Security Advisor Dan Kane, the full principal-level national security team. Not a deputies meeting, not a staff-level discussion. The principals together on May 11th discussing how to move forward with Iran. Two American officials told Axios that Trump is leaning toward taking some form of military action against Iran to increase pressure on the regime and force concessions on its nuclear program. The specific phrase one official used, he will tune them up a bit. This is the language of calibrated escalation rather than decisive strike, the communication of a principal who has concluded that the diplomatic channel's 1% survival probability does not justify restraint, but who is calibrating the response against the diplomatic calendar that includes the Beijing summit in 2 days. The three options on the table are distinct in character, scope, and strategic implication. Understanding what each one would produce operationally is the analytical work that the Axios reporting framework points toward but does not complete. Option 1, resuming Project Freedom. The escort operation that was launched on May 4th paused for the Pakistani diplomatic window, and then partially resumed and partially paused again as the ceasefire's fragility became increasingly visible. Resuming Project Freedom means reactivating the full escort architecture. The Arleigh Burke destroyers, the carrier-based aviation overhead, the cleared shipping lanes, and guiding commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz under the American military's protective umbrella. This option is the most limited of the three in its escalatory implications. It does not resume bombing of Iranian territory. It does not involve special operations ground action inside Iran. It is the continuation of the blockade enforcement and freedom of navigation mission that CENTCOM has been executing, with the operational architecture restored to the full scale of its May 4th configuration. The Iranian response to this option is the specific military engagement that Project Freedom's first day produced. The IRGC attacks on escort vessels that produced American counterfire against the attacking boats, the chain of defensive engagements that make Project Freedom inherently kinetic, even without an offensive strike authorization. Option 2. Resuming the bombing campaign against the remaining 25% of identified Iranian military targets. This is the option that they will be laughing no longer. Truth Social Post, the totally unacceptable rejection of the Iranian counterproposal, and the 1 to 2 week Israeli strike plan submitted to Washington have been pointing toward throughout this analysis. The 25% figure is operationally specific and tells you something important about what has not been addressed in the previous strikes. Epic Fury addressed the high-priority, time-sensitive targets first: the Integrated Air Defense Network, the Navy, the ballistic missile launch infrastructure, the IRGC command nodes. The 25% that remains is the target set that was identified but not struck in the initial campaign, either because the targeting intelligence was not yet refined to the precision required for effective strike, or because the operational sequencing prioritized other targets, or because some of these targets are hardened and dispersed in ways that require the collection that the F-35 ISR missions have been building before the strikes are ready to execute. Striking the remaining 25% adds a specific category of targets that the ceasefire has given the collection architecture 73 days to refine. The fast attack boat fleet and its coastal storage facilities, the remaining coastal missile batteries that the previous CAD campaign did not fully address, the Qatar submarine support infrastructure, the command and control nodes for the swarm operations, and the Vahidi command decapitation objective that the Israeli strike plan specified. The 25% is not a random sampling of targets the previous campaign missed. It is the specific target set that requires the persistent ISR collection, the F-35 missions that squawked 7,700 twice in 2 days, to enable. Option 3, the Israeli government's preferred outcome, a special operations mission to secure Iran's enriched uranium stockpile, the 440 kilograms at Isfahan, the material that Space Force is watching at badge number precision that Trump has described as under 24/7 surveillance, that only China and the United States have the specific technical capability to extract safely. Israeli officials want Trump to authorize a combined American-Israeli special operations mission to physically secure and remove the stockpile. The MV Ocean Trader in the Indian Ocean, with its Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 complement, its helicopter assets, and its maritime insertion capability, is the American platform whose positioning makes this mission operationally possible. Trump's hesitation, characterized in the reporting as significant, is the specific risk assessment of a principal who understands that putting American special operations forces on the ground inside Iran's nuclear facility, with Iranian security personnel present and Iranian military forces potentially in the area, is the mission type whose failure mode is catastrophic rather than merely unsuccessful. An unsuccessful bombing strike fails to destroy its target and requires a follow-on mission. An unsuccessful special operations mission to secure enriched uranium inside Iran fails with American operators potentially captured, killed, or stranded in the middle of one of the most heavily secured facilities in the Iranian nuclear program, with the geopolitical consequences of American ground forces being captured inside Iran immediately transforming every dimension of the conflict. The risk calculus is asymmetric. The bombing option's failure cost is operational and manageable. The special operations option's failure cost is political, diplomatic, and potentially the kind of transformative event that reframes the entire conflict's international standing. Trump's enriched uranium commentary is the most strategically revealing element of his May 11th public communications. He described the bombing of the uranium sites, the deep penetration strikes that the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator delivered from B-2 bombers across the granite mountain terrain of the Iranian nuclear program's underground facilities. He said, every single one of those bombs were right down an air shaft in a granite mountain that exploded. And they are unable to get it even if they wanted to. He then said that 2 days ago, 2 days before the Axios report, presumably during the diplomatic window that has now collapsed, Iran agreed to allow the removal of the enriched uranium. They said you're going to have to take it, and then they changed their mind. This is the specific reversal that the Iranian sources close to the negotiating team are denying. Tehran's response does not include any agreement to remove enriched uranium from the country, the sources told reporters. Trump says they agreed, then changed their mind. Iran says they never agreed. The gap between those positions is not a drafting ambiguity or translation problem. It is the fundamental negotiating breakdown that the ceasefire's 1% survival probability reflects. If Iran agreed to uranium transfer and then reversed within 48 hours of formally submitting that agreement, the reversal is the IRGC hardline faction overriding the pragmatist faction's negotiating concession. The specific command incoherence that Mojtaba Khamenei's incapacitation and the IRGC's institutional dominance of the Iranian decision-making process has been producing throughout this conflict. If Iran never agreed, and Trump is mischaracterizing what happened, the diplomatic record has a different kind of problem. Either way, the uranium is still in Iran, and the agreement that transfers it out of Iran does not exist. Trump's description of the Iranian leadership tiers is the most analytically interesting element of his commentary because it maps the institutional fracture inside the Iranian power structure in terms that the president himself has absorbed from his intelligence briefings. The first level is gone. The original IRGC command structure that was in place on February 28th has been substantially disrupted by the conflict's opening phase. The second level is more reasonable. The pragmatist elements, Arakchi's diplomatic track, the officials who submitted the counterproposal, and who were reportedly willing 2 days earlier to include uranium transfer, represent the second tier. The third level, Nobody wants to be president. The vacuum at the top of the Iranian institutional hierarchy, with Mojtaba reportedly in a bunker trying to preserve authority his father had, with the supreme leader position incapacitated at the moment of maximum decision-making requirement, is producing the institutional paralysis where the third tier is looking at the presidency, the nominal executive function, and seeing no one willing to claim the accountability that the position carries in this moment. This institutional portrait is the operational picture that the resumed bombing's decision-making is operating against. The reasonable second level wants to deal. The hardline IRGC elements either control or can override the second level when the deal approaches the terms that the IRGC's institutional survival requires refusing. The third level provides no resolution because it represents institutional paralysis rather than decision-making capacity. The result is the specific pattern Trump described in the uranium context. They agreed 2 days ago. Then they changed their mind. Then they sent a document that took 5 days to arrive, that should have taken 20 minutes. Iran's public communications on May 11th are the institutional performance of a regime that has concluded, or cannot afford to acknowledge that it has not concluded, that continued defiance is the only available posture. Kolobov's declaration: our armed forces are ready to deliver a well-deserved response to any aggression. Mistaken strategy and mistaken decisions will always lead to mistaken results. The whole world has already figured this out. We are prepared for all options. They will be surprised. This is the communication of an institution that is watching an Ohio-class ballistic missile submarine surface in Gibraltar, watching the E-6B Mercury aircraft deploy to Germany, watching Trump's national security team meet with the full principal-level apparatus and emerge leaning toward military action and responding with the institutional performance of maximum defiance, because the alternative, showing the domestic audience that the institutional assessment of the situation is anything other than confident, is not politically survivable for the IRGC's internal political position. They are digging out their missiles. The intelligence picture of Iranian military activity in the ceasefire period includes the observable indicators of a force that is repositioning, reloading, and reconfiguring for resumed conflict. The dispersal of remaining missile and launcher assets to new positions that the ISR collection cycle has been trying to catalog. The underground storage facilities being opened and accessed for inventory assessment and maintenance, the fast attack boat fleet being readied in coastal shelters, the Ghadir submarines already deployed into the strait. Iran is not preparing for a diplomatic resolution. Its military operational activity is the preparation of a force for resumed hostilities on the assumption that those hostilities are coming regardless of what the counterproposal produces. The 40-day oil storage countdown, the collapsed ceasefire talks, the Ohio-class submarine in Gibraltar, the E-6B in Germany, the national security team meeting, the leaning toward military action characterization, the 1% survival probability declaration, the 25% remaining target list. All of these are the simultaneous pressures converging on a decision point that the Trump administration is characterizing publicly as imminent rather than contingent. The Beijing summit timing is the constraint that Trump's leaning toward military action, but not yet authorized characterization, most directly reflects. The summit begins in approximately 2 days. An American president who authorizes the resumption of bombing against Iran 48 hours before arriving in China for a 2-day state visit with Xi Jinping is an American president who arrives at that summit having just initiated the kinetic action that China's legislation against American sanctions compliance is specifically designed as a response to. The meeting that was supposed to produce some framework for Chinese cooperation on the Iran question, or at minimum to manage the Chinese-American relationship through the conflict's final phase, would be arriving in the context of resumed bombing rather than as the diplomatic alternative to it. The question of sequencing, do the strikes happen before Beijing, during Beijing, or after Beijing, is the specific decision that Trump's national security team is apparently working through in the post-ceasefire collapse period. Before Beijing, maximum escalatory signal to both Iran and China simultaneously, but maximum diplomatic disruption of the summit that might produce the Chinese cooperation on Iran that makes the military option less costly. During Beijing, the specific scenario that the analysis has flagged as potentially an Israeli decision rather than an American one, Israel's history of taking military action that forces American diplomatic hands, combined with Israel's institutional indifference to American summit schedules, makes the during summit strike scenario one that the analysis cannot dismiss as implausible regardless of American preferences. After Beijing, the diplomatic channel with China is explored before the military escalation resumes, potentially producing either Chinese cooperation that changes the calculus or Chinese obstruction that removes any remaining constraint on the military option. The submarine in Gibraltar is the specific signal that makes clear which side of this timing debate the current military positioning favors. You do not surface an Ohio-class ballistic missile submarine in Gibraltar and release the photographs and the official announcement 48 hours before a state visit to Beijing if the diplomatic track is the primary focus of the next 72 hours. You surface the submarine and release the photographs if you want every audience, including Xi Jinping, including the American public, including the Iranian regime, including every government watching this conflict, to understand that the military option is immediate, capable, and positioned in a way that makes the diplomatic track the choice you're offering rather than the certainty you are pursuing. This is the negotiating posture of an administration that has learned from its experience with the Iranian counterproposal, from the 5-day delay that should have taken 20 minutes, from the agreement that reversed within 48 hours, from the total unacceptable demand for full Strait of Hormuz sovereignty and all frozen assets and war reparations, that the diplomatic track has produced everything it can produce, short of the physical application of the remaining military options. The Ohio-class submarine is the physical embodiment of what one more step up the escalation ladder looks like. Not the nuclear weapon, the vessel that carries it, the presence of the platform within range, the deliberate surfacing that makes the presence undeniable. Iran will be surprised, Kalabaev says. They are prepared for all options. The armed forces are ready. The mistaken decisions will lead to mistaken results. What they are prepared for is the resumed bombing campaign against the 25% of identified targets that the previous phase left unconsumed. What they have not demonstrated preparation for is the comprehensive targeting of their fast attack boat fleet and its coastal storage facilities, the targeting package that the F-35 ISR missions have been building. What they have not demonstrated preparation for is the decapitation of Vahidi and the senior IRGC command structure that the Israeli strike plan specified. What they have not demonstrated preparation for is the specific scenario where the uranium extraction decision goes from Trump's hesitation to the MV Ocean Trader's insertion window, and the special operations mission that Space Force's badge number surveillance of Isfahan has been watching for executes. They may be surprised. The ceasefire that has a 1% chance of living is the specific medical condition that the Ohio-class submarine in Gibraltar is the treatment for. The treatment is not comfortable. The E-6B Mercury in Germany is the specialist, the doctor called in to consult on the case. And the National Security Team meeting on May 11th, with the full principals in the room, with Trump's leaning toward taking some form of military action to increase pressure and force concessions on the nuclear program. With the E, we'll tune them up a bit, and I think we all know where this is going. Characterizations from senior American officials. That meeting is the chart review before the treatment begins. 1% chance of living. The doctor has walked in. The family has been notified. The submarine is in Gibraltar. The command aircraft is in Germany. The targeting package is being completed. The principals have met. And the enriched uranium that Iran agreed to transfer 2 days ago and then changed its mind about is still in the granite mountain that only China and the United States have the capability to safely extract it from. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Because the Ohio-class submarine's deliberate surfacing in Gibraltar is the single most consequential military positioning signal delivered in this conflict since February 28th. Because it represents the American nuclear deterrence architecture making itself visible at a moment when the president has characterized the ceasefire as having a 1% survival probability and is leaning toward military action. Drop your prediction in the comments. Does the resumed military action begin before the Beijing summit in 2 days, during the summit in what would be the specific scenario where Israeli operational independence forces American decision-making, or after the summit once the Chinese diplomatic track has been exhausted? Does the 25% remaining target set include the Vahidi decapitation strike that the Israeli plan specified? And does eliminating the IRGC's commander-in-chief in the context of Mojtaba's incapacitation produce the institutional